When we are children sitting in a geography class, the world makes perfect sense. We look at maps and globes, and we see neat, brightly colored shapes separated by perfectly drawn lines. We are taught that a border is a definite thing. It is a wall, a fence, a river, or a line drawn in the sand that says, this side is us and that side is them. But maps are an illusion. The earth itself has no natural political lines. Borders are nothing more than human imagination, drawn by politicians, kings, and generals, often hastily and with terrible consequences. Because human history is messy, chaotic, and full of strange compromises, some of the borders on our planet make absolutely no logical sense. Today, we are going to explore the geographical glitches in our world. From a town where a single restaurant exists in two countries simultaneously, to a piece of land that no nation on earth wants to claim. Welcome to the world's weirdest borders. Our first stop takes us to Western Europe, right on the border of Belgium and the Netherlands. Here lies a town that breaks every rule of territorial logic. It is actually two towns occupying the exact same space. The border here isn't a straight line. It looks like someone dropped a pane of glass on a map. There are 22 separate pieces of Belgium scattered entirely inside the Netherlands. And inside some of those Belgian pieces, there are even smaller pieces of Netherlands. The result is absolute geographical chaos. The international border runs arbitrarily through cafes, living rooms, and grocery stores. You can sit at a restaurant table where your coffee is in Belgium, but the person sitting across from you is in the Netherlands. This creates a massive legal nightmare. Which country's laws do you follow? Which country do you pay taxes to? To solve this, the towns created the front door rule. Whichever country your front door opens into, that is the country you officially live in. Historically, the locals have used this bizarre loophole to their advantage. Years ago, Dutch law required bars to close earlier than Belgian bars. When closing time hit the Netherlands, patrons simply picked up their tables and moved them a few feet to the Belgian side of the room to keep drinking. How does this happen? It dates back to the Middle Ages. Aristocrats and lords swapped, sold, and gambled away tiny plots of land over centuries. When the modern borders were finally drawn in 1843, untangling this mess was so complicated that the governments simply decided to leave it exactly as it was. If you thought barley was confusing, it is nothing compared to the geopolitical puzzle that existed for decades along the border of India and Bangladesh. It was a geographic equivalent of a Russian nesting doll. In a region known as Kuch Bihar, there existed a phenomenon called enclaves, a piece of one country entirely surrounded by another. But this wasn't just one or two pieces, there are nearly 200 of them. It was a mind-blending reality. There were pieces of India inside Bangladesh. But inside those pieces of India, there were smaller pieces of Bangladesh. And incredibly, inside one of those, there was a third order enclave. A tiny piece of India known as Dahala Khagrabari. It was an enclave inside an enclave, inside an enclave. It sounds like a fascinating trivia fact, but for the tens of thousands of people living inside these fragmented borders, it was a living nightmare. They were effectively trapped. If an Indian citizen living in one of these enclaves needed to go to a hospital in mainland India, they couldn't. To step off their farm meant illegally crossing an international border into Bangladesh. They had no infrastructure, no electricity from their home country, and no legal rights in the country that surrounded them. They lived as stateless ghosts. Local legend says these chaotic borders were the result of two ancient Maharajas using pieces of their kingdoms as wagers in a drunken game of chess. In reality, it was a result of centuries of fragmented peace treaties, complicated further by the British partition of the region in 1947. For nearly 70 years, the border remained frozen, but finally in 2015, India and Bangladesh signed a historic land boundary agreement. They essentially traded the enclaves, smoothing out the border and allowing the citizens to finally choose their nationality. The world's most complicated border and the world's only third-order enclave was finally erased from the map. Wars have been fought over land since the dawn of humanity. Nations will spend billions of dollars to claim even the smallest strip of territory. But hidden deep in the African desert, there is a piece of land that absolutely nobody wants. It is called Bir Tawil. It is an arid, barren stretch of desert trapped between the borders of Egypt and Sudan. And it is one of the only habitable places on the entire planet that is not claimed by any recognized. How can a piece of earth be completely abandoned? The blame falls entirely on British colonial cartographers. In 1899, the British drew a perfectly straight border between Egypt and Sudan. But 3 years later, in 1902, they drew a second border, this time curving the line to account for local tribes. This created two disputed areas. One was the Halab Triangle, a large resource-rich piece of land right on the Red Sea coast. The other was Bir Tawil, a small, worthless patch of inland sand. Here is a geopolitical trap. Because of how the maps overlap, each country can legally only claim one of the territories. If Egypt claims the worthless Bir Tawil, they legally forfeit the valuable coastal land to Sudan. And if the Sudan claims Bir Tawil, they forfeit the coast of Egypt. Therefore, both nations fiercely claim the coastal land, and as a direct consequence, both nations strictly refuse to claim Bir Tawil. They each insist that the barren desert belongs to the other. Because neither country claims it, Bir Tawil has become a magnet for eccentric travelers and internet adventurers. Over the years, dozens of ordinary people have traveled to this scorching desert simply to plant a homemade flag and declare themselves the king or queen of their own unrecognized nation. Barley, Cooch Behar and Bir Tawil, three incredibly different places bound together by the same fundamental truth. The borders that govern our lives, that decide our nationalities, our taxes, and sometimes our very survival, are not forces of nature. They are not absolute. They are fragile, messy agreements made by flawed human beings. From space, there are no enclaves. There are no disputed triangles. There is only one continuous, unbroken piece of land shared by 8 billion people. Perhaps one day, the lines we draw on maps will reflect that reality. Until then, we must navigate the beautiful, chaotic glitches of the borders we created.